Schleswig-Holstein, the ship symbol of two world wars. Prologue, a steel witness to an era. In the history of navies, there are ships whose fates become a mirror of entire epochs. They are born in one set of historical circumstances, serve in another, and meet their end in a third. The battleship Schleswig-Holstein was precisely such a ship. Its history began in the era of Imperial Germany, reached its apex in the Nazi Reich, and ended in the post-war reality of the Soviet Union. This ship witnessed and participated in the key events of the 20th century, and its guns fired the first salvos of the most terrible war in human history. Chapter 1. Birth in an Era of Change, 1905 to 1908, 1.1. The Naval Race and German Ambitions. The beginning of the 20th century was a time of an unprecedented naval arms race. The German Empire, unified under Otto von Bismarck and led by the ambitious Kaiser Wilhelm II, sought to challenge British naval dominance. Admiral Alfred von Tirpitz, the creator of the German High Seas Fleet, developed an ambitious program to build a modern fleet capable of confronting the British Grand Fleet. In this context, in 1904, the last of a series of 5 pre-dreadnought battleships of the Deutschland class was ordered. These ships were intended to be the pinnacle of pre-dreadnought battleship development, the final word in shipbuilding before the revolution brought about by the British dreadnought. 1.2. Laying the keel and construction. On August 18, 1905, the keel-laying ceremony for the new ship took place at the Friedrich Krupp Germania Werft shipyard in Kiel. It was given the name Schleswig-Holstein in honor of the Prussian province, a land with a rich history located on the border with Denmark. The choice of name was symbolic. It reflected Germany's imperial ambitions and its desire for territorial expansion. Construction proceeded rapidly. On December 17, 1906, the ship was launched. The ceremony was truly imperial. Kaiser Wilhelm II and Empress Augusta Victoria were present, with the Empress christening the ship. Ernst Günther, Duke of Schleswig-Holstein, gave a ceremonial speech, emphasizing the ship's connection to the historical region. 1.3. Technical specifications. The pinnacle of the pre-dreadnought era. The Schleswig-Holstein represented an impressive engineering achievement for its time. Main characteristics: displacement, 13,200 tons, normal, 14,218 tons, full load, length, 127.6 meters, beam, 22.2 meters, draft, 8.21 meters, crew, 743 men, 35 officers, and 708 sailors, propulsion system, 3 triple expansion steam engines, 12 Schultz-Thornycroft water tube boilers, coal-fired, power, 19, 330 shaft horsepower, maximum speed, 19.1 knots, the fastest in its class, range, 5,720 nautical miles at 10 knots, armor, main belt, 240 millimeters amidships, turret armor, 280 millimeters, armored deck, 40 millimeters, conning tower, 300 millimeters armament at the time of construction. Main battery, 4 times 280 millimeter SKL/40 guns in 2 twin-gun turrets. Secondary battery, 14 by 170 millimeters SKL/40 guns in casemates. Torpedo boat defense, 22 by 88 millimeters SKL/35 guns. Torpedo armament, 6 by 450 millimeter torpedo tubes 1.4. A fateful coincidence, birth and instant obsolescence. The irony of fate was that in the same December 1906, when the Schleswig-Holstein was launched, the revolutionary battleship HMS Dreadnought entered the British fleet. Armed with 10 305mm guns and equipped with turbine propulsion, Dreadnought instantly rendered all existing battleships in the world obsolete, including the newly built German ship. Thus, the Schleswig-Holstein entered service on July 6, 1908, already technically outdated. It became the last pre-dreadnought battleship in the German fleet, a symbol of the end of one era and the beginning of another. Chapter 2. Service in the Imperial Fleet, 1908 to 1918, 2.1. Peacetime service and exercises. After commissioning, Schleswig-Holstein was assigned to the 2nd Squadron of the High Seas Fleet alongside its sister ships. The first years of service were filled with routine exercises and cruises. 1908, November exercises in the Baltic Sea. 1909, cruise into the Atlantic from July 7th to August 1st, 1910 to 1913. Standard cycle, spring exercises, summer cruise to Norway, autumn exercises. 1913. Received the Kaiser's Schießpreis, prize for excellent gunnery. In September 1910, Captain Friedrich Bodecker took command of the ship, holding the post for 3 years. Under his leadership, the crew achieved a high level of combat training. 2.2. The beginning of World War I. On July 14, 1914, Schleswig-Holstein, together with other ships of the 2nd Squadron, departed for the annual cruise to Norway. However, due to the growing threat of war in Europe, the cruise was cut short, and the ships returned to Wilhelmshaven. With the outbreak of war in July 1914, Schleswig-Holstein performed guard duties in the mouth of the Elbe River, while the main forces of the fleet were mobilized for more active operations. 2.3. First combat operations. At the end of October 1914, all Deutschland-class ships underwent modernization of their underwater anti-mine and anti-torpedo protection in Kiel. After this, Schleswig-Holstein returned to the active fleet. Operation against the English coast, December 15 to 16, 1914. The ship, as part of a covering force, protected the battlecruisers of the 1st Scouting Group under Rear Admiral Franz von Hipper during the bombardments of Hartlepool, Scarborough, and Whitby. During this operation, 12 German dreadnoughts and 8 pre-dreadnoughts approached within about 10 nautical miles of an isolated squadron of 6 British battleships. However, an equal destroyer engagement led Admiral Friedrich von Ingenohl to believe he was facing the entire Grand Fleet, and he broke off the action. Further operations in 1915 to 1916. April 1915, participation in the advance to the Dogger Bank. September 1915, support for mine-laying operations on the Swart Bank. March 1916, advance into the North Sea as part of the 2nd Squadron. April 1916, replacement of 2 88mm guns with anti-aircraft guns of the same caliber. 2.4. The Battle of Jutland. Trial by fire. The culmination of Schleswig-Holstein's combat service in World War I was its participation in the Battle of Jutland on May 31 to June 1, 1916, the largest naval battle of the war and one of the most massive in history. Position in the battle line. Schleswig-Holstein was the last ship of the 4th Division, 2nd Squadron, the rearmost ship of the entire German formation. The 2nd Squadron was commanded by Rear Admiral Franz Mauve. The course of the battle for Schleswig-Holstein. Initial stage. While pursuing the retreating ships of the British 5th Battle Squadron, Schleswig-Holstein and the other pre-dreadnoughts quickly fell behind the faster dreadnoughts. Scheer's maneuvers. Admiral Reinhard Scheer 3 times executed the complex _2 maneuver of 180 degrees, trying to keep his old battleships as far as possible from the fire of the British dreadnoughts. Night action. Towards the end of the first day of battle, Hipper's damaged battlecruisers were attacked by the British. Schleswig-Holstein and other 5-minute ships came to their aid, interposing themselves between the battle lines of the British and German battlecruisers. Receiving damage. At 21:35, a large caliber shell hit the ship's port side. The shell punched a hole about 40 centimeters in diameter and exploded inside an armored casemate. The explosion destroyed 4.5 meters of the superstructure deck. Loss of Pommern. During the night of June 1st, taking advantage of the pre-dawn fog, a flotilla of British destroyers fired 17 torpedoes at the German battleship line. 1 or 2 torpedoes struck the central part of the sister ship, Pommern. The ship was blown up by a magazine explosion and sank with 839 crew members. Results for Schleswig-Holstein. Fired about 20 main battery shells, sustained 1 serious hit, remained in service. The crew demonstrated high skill and resilience. The Battle of Jutland demonstrated the vulnerability of pre-dreadnoughts in the era of dreadnoughts. Immediately after the battle, the Deutschland-class ships were finally withdrawn from the high seas fleet. 2.5. End of the war and internment. After Jutland, the combat value of Schleswig-Holstein declined sharply. 1917. Placed in reserve. Partially disarmed. Remaining armament, 6 times 105 millimeters and 4 times 88 millimeter guns. Autumn 1917. Converted into a floating barracks in Kiel. 1918. Transferred to Bremerhaven, then used as a training ship. After Germany's capitulation in November 1918, Schleswig-Holstein, along with the main forces of the High Seas Fleet, was interned at Scapa Flow. However, on June 21, 1919, the German sailors scuttled their ships to prevent them from falling into the hands of the victors. Schleswig-Holstein avoided this fate as it was still in Germany. Chapter 3. The Interwar Period. Rebirth from the Ashes, 1919 to 1939. 3.1. The Versailles Restrictions and the ship's preservation. Under the terms of the 1919 Treaty of Versailles, Germany was permitted to retain only limited naval forces, 15,000 sailors, 8 obsolete battleships, including 2 in reserve, 6 light cruisers, 12 destroyers, 12 torpedo boats. A ban on submarines, Schleswig-Holstein became one of the 8 battleships retained by Germany. Along with it, Schlesien, Hessen, Lothringen, Braunschweig, Elsass, Preußen, and Hanover were also kept. 3.2. Modernization of 1924 to 1926. To make the obsolete ships suitable for further service, Schleswig-Holstein underwent a major modernization at the Wilhelmshaven shipyard in 1924 to 1926. Main changes: power plant. 8 of the 12 boilers were converted to oil firing. Superstructure. The forward funnel was merged with the second. Artillery. All 170 millimeter guns were removed. 12 by 150 millimeter SKL/45 guns were installed. The previous 88 millimeter guns were removed. 4 by 88 millimeter FLKL/45 anti-aircraft guns were installed. Torpedo armament, all torpedo tubes were removed. After modernization, the ship's displacement increased to 14,465 tons, and its speed decreased to 17 knots. 3.3. Flagship of the Weimar Republic's fleet. On February 1, 1926, Schleswig-Holstein was recommissioned as the flagship of the Weimar Republic's fleet. In this role, it served for 9.5 years, until 1935. Significance as flagship. Symbol of the continuity of German naval traditions. Demonstration of German shipbuilding's technical capabilities. A floating school for a new generation of sailors. Instrument of foreign policy. Visits to foreign ports. 3.4. The transition to the Nazi regime. With the Nazis' rise to power in 1933, the gradual rebuilding of German naval forces began. Schleswig-Holstein continued to serve as flagship, but its role began to change. 1935. End of service as flagship. Modern ships, including pocket battleships, took its place. 1936. Converted into a training ship. Underwent additional modernization at the Wilhelmshaven shipyard, further strengthening of anti-aircraft armament, installation of modern fire control systems, adaptation of spaces to accommodate cadets. By 1939, the armament of Schleswig-Holstein consisted of main battery, 4 times 280 mm guns, 2 times 2, secondary battery, 10 times 150 mm guns, soon removed, anti-aircraft artillery, 4 times 88 mm guns, 4 times 37 mm automatic cannons, 2 times 2, 3.5. Preparation for war. By the summer of 1939, the international situation had deteriorated sharply. Germany was preparing to attack Poland, and Schleswig-Holstein was chosen for a special mission. Operation Plan: enter the Bay of Danzig under the guise of a friendship visit. Covertly transport a company of naval infantry. Surprise bombardment of the Polish fortifications at Westerplatte. Support the landing of assault troops. On August 25, 1939, Schleswig-Holstein entered the Bay of Danzig. The official reason given for the visit was to commemorate the 25th anniversary of the sinking of a German vessel there during World War I. In reality, the ship was a floating battery tasked with bombarding the Polish coast. Interesting episode. On August 25th, the ship weighed anchor and steamed at full speed towards the Westerplatte Peninsula, but then suddenly turned around and returned to its original anchorage. The attack, planned for August 26th, was postponed by Hitler's order. Chapter 4. World War II, from the first salvo to the last shot, 1939 to 1945, 4.1. September 1st, 1939. The first shots of the war. In the early morning of September 1st, 1939, Schleswig-Holstein lay in the roadstead of Danzig. At 4:30 a.m., the ship was brought to a state of combat readiness by a single pistol shot. 4:45 a.m. The main battery guns of Schleswig-Holstein opened fire on the Polish fortifications on the Westerplatte Peninsula. These shots were the first salvos of World War II. The bombardment of Westerplatte. Target: Polish military transit depot and its garrison. 182 soldiers and 27 civilians. Polish armament: 1 times 76 mm gun, 2 times 37 mm anti-tank guns, 4 times 81 mm mortars, 41 machine guns. German forces: 3,500 soldiers, Schleswig-Holstein, 2 other ships, 47 to 70 Ju-87 dive bombers. 65 artillery pieces. Course of the battle: artillery preparation, intense bombardment of the fortifications. Landing of assault troops. The naval infantry company, which had secretly arrived on the ship, landed on the shore. Polish defense. Despite overwhelming enemy superiority, the Polish garrison offered stubborn resistance. Continued bombardment. Schleswig-Holstein remained in the Vistula Delta for the following weeks, firing on Polish positions. Outcome: the defense of Westerplatte lasted 7 days. Only on September 7th, when ammunition ran out and the Germans used flamethrowers, did the Polish garrison surrender. Casualties: 15 killed and 53 wounded on the Polish side, 300 to 400 killed and wounded on the German side. 4.2. The Polish campaign and further service. After the fall of Westerplatte, Schleswig-Holstein continued to support German forces in Poland. Bombardment of coastal fortifications, support for advancing ground troops, blockade of the Polish coast, October 1939 to March 1940, returned to Germany, used as a training ship, 4.3, Operation Weserübung, the seizure of Denmark and Norway. In April 1940, Schleswig-Holstein took part in the operation to seize Denmark, part of Operation Weserübung. Ship's tasks: support the landing of German troops in Denmark, bombard coastal fortifications. Show of force for psychological impact. Course of the operation: April 9, 1940. Invasion of Denmark begins. Fire support for landing troops. Rapid capitulation. Denmark surrendered within hours. After the completion of the Danish operation, Schleswig-Holstein returned to Germany. 4.4. Training service, 1940 to 1944. From 1940 to 1944, Schleswig-Holstein was used as a training ship, flagship of the Chief of Training Units of the Kriegsmarine, training new generations of sailors. Preservation of naval traditions. Crew in its training capacity, 1936. 31 officers, 565 sailors, 175 cadets. Total, 771 men. However, even in its training role, Schleswig-Holstein was periodically called upon for combat operations, mainly for bombarding coastal targets. 4.5. Return to service and final modernization. By 1943, the situation at the fronts had changed. Fuel oil shortages forced the German command to reconsider using old ships. Reasons for returning to combat duty: fuel oil shortage. Some of Schleswig-Holstein's boilers could run on coal. Need for anti-aircraft ships, strengthening the air defense of ports. Shortage of modern ships. Kriegsmarine losses in the Atlantic and other theaters. Modernization, October to December, 1944. Conversion into an escort anti-aircraft ship. Strengthened anti-aircraft armament. 6 times 105 mm SKC/32 anti-aircraft guns, 4 times 37 mm SKC/30 automatic cannons, 10 times 40 mm flak 28 automatic cannons, 4 times 20 mm C/38 automatic cannons. Later, 4x4 and 8x2 by 20 mm C/38 automatic cannons. Installation of radar equipment. Modern search and fire control radar sets. New fire control systems. Modern anti-aircraft fire control directors. Other equipment, improved communication systems, modernized observation posts. After modernization, Schleswig-Holstein was reclassified as an anti-aircraft ship and assigned to protect Baltic ports. 4.6. Final battles and sinking. December 1944. Schleswig-Holstein lay in the roadstead of Gotenhafen, Gdynia, performing air defense duties. December 19, 1944. RAF air raid. Attack. Royal Air Force aircraft attacked the ship. Hits. 3 bombs struck Schleswig-Holstein. Aftermath. The ship caught fire and sank in 12 meters of water. January to March 1945. The ship's wreck continued to be used. January 25, 1945, flag and pennant lowered. Deployment of the crew. The remaining crew members were sent to the land front, to the garrison of Marienburg, Malbork. March 21, 1945. When Marienburg was fully captured by Soviet troops, the surviving personnel detonated demolition charges placed in the ship's wreck. Thus ended the combat service of Schleswig-Holstein, the ship that began World War II and was destroyed just weeks before its end in Europe. Chapter 5. Post-war fate. From Borodino to the seabed, 1945 to 1960s, 5.1. Salvage and examination. Spring 1946. The salvage service of the Soviet fleet raised Schleswig-Holstein from the bottom of Gotenhafen harbor. Examination of the trophy. Technical inspection. Soviet specialists thoroughly examined the ship's structure. Condition assessment. The ship was heavily damaged and required major repairs. Decision on non-repairability. Due to the extent of the damage and the obsolescence of its design, restoration was deemed impractical. 5.2. Renaming and towing. After being raised, the ship was renamed Borodino, in honor of the famous Battle of the Patriotic War of 1812. This renaming was symbolic. A German ship that had started the war against the USSR was given the name of a Russian victory. Towing to Tallinn. The ship was towed to Tallinn for further study and a final decision on its fate. 5.3. Scuttling as a target. June 25, 1947. Due to the impossibility of restoration, Borodino, ex-Schleswig-Holstein, was scuttled in the area of the Neugrund Bank in the Gulf of Finland. Scuttling site near Osmussaar Island in the Baltic at a depth of about 10 meters. Use as a target. The ship's hulk was used for target practice by the Soviet fleet until the 1960s. 5.4. Current condition preservation of remains. The ship's remains still exist today and lie at a depth of about 10 meters. They have become an object of interest for divers and historians. The ship's bell. The bell of Schleswig-Holstein is displayed in the Bundeswehr Military History Museum in Dresden, a silent witness to the ship's history. Chapter 6. Technical Analysis. The Evolution of the Ship. 6.1. Design features of the Deutschland-class predecessors and evolution. The Deutschland-class battleships were the logical culmination of a series of German pre-dreadnoughts from the early 20th century. Kaiser-class, 1898 to 1902. Wittelsbach-class, 1900 to 1902. Braunschweig-class, 1901 to 1904. Deutschland-class, 1903 to 1908. Design conservatism. The main reason for the conservative design was the size limitation of the Kiel Canal. The dimensions of the Braunschweig class were the maximum that could still pass through the canal. Increasing the size would have required reconstructing the canal or abandoning the ability to use the fleet in both the North and Baltic seas. Main differences from predecessors: increased thickness of turret and main belt armor by 1 inch. Simpler casemates instead of turrets for the 4 upper 170mm mountings. Improved armor system. 6.2. Comparison with contemporaries. British counterparts: HMS Dreadnought, 1906. Revolutionary design, 10 by 305mm guns, turbine propulsion. HMS Lord Nelson, 1906. 4 by 305mm, 10 by 234mm, 21 knots. French counterparts: République, 1902. 4 by 305mm, 18 by 164mm, 18 knots. Russian counterparts: Andrei Pervozvany, 1906. 4 by 305mm, 14 by 203mm, 18.5 knots. Conclusion. Schleswig-Holstein was a typical representative of the last generation of pre-dreadnoughts, but its appearance coincided with a revolution in naval architecture. 6.3. Assessment of combat effectiveness. Strengths: powerful armament. 4 times 280mm guns were effective against most targets. Good armor: 240 to 280mm armor provided protection against medium-caliber shells. Reliability: proven design, refined in previous series. Seaworthiness: good characteristics for operations in the North and Baltic seas. Weaknesses: obsolescence, instant obsolescence with the appearance of dreadnoughts. Limited speed, 19.1 knots versus 21+ knots for dreadnoughts. Artillery arrangement, traditional layout with turrets fore and aft. Vulnerability, demonstrated at the Battle of Jutland. 6.4. Modernizations and their effectiveness. Modernization of 1924 to 1926. Pros: increased efficiency. Conversion to oil firing. Cons: reduced speed, increased displacement. Modernization of 1936. Pros: Strengthened AA defense, improved conditions for cadets. Cons, limited capabilities of the old design. Modernization of 1944. Pros, conversion into an effective AA ship. Cons, belated measures, the ship was already obsolete. Chapter 7, Historical Significance and Legacy. 7.1, Symbolic Significance. A ship symbol, symbol of German naval ambitions, from Imperial Germany to the Third Reich. Symbol of obsolescence, born already outdated in an era of technical revolutions. Symbol of the beginning of war, the first shots of World War II. Symbol of longevity, service in 3 different German states. Cultural significance, mentions in historical literature, depiction in documentary and feature films, subject of research for historians and military analysts. 7.2. Lessons of history. Technical lessons. Speed of technological change. The ship was obsolete even before entering service. Importance of timely modernization. Several modernizations extended the ship's life. Limitations of outdated platforms. Even major modernizations could not make a pre-dreadnought equal to a dreadnought. Military strategic lessons. Use of obsolete ships. Schleswig-Holstein was effectively used for secondary tasks. Importance of surprise. The success of the Westerplatte operation was ensured by surprise. Limitations of coastal artillery. Even an obsolete battleship could effectively support land operations. Historical lessons. Continuity of military traditions. The ship served in 3 different political systems. Use of history and propaganda, a quote 6 as a cover for a military operation. Fate of war trophies. The ship's post-war fate as a reflection of relations between former adversaries. 7.3. Legacy in naval affairs. Influence on shipbuilding. Operational and modernization experience was used in the design of new ships. Lessons from the Battle of Jutland influenced the design of subsequent battleships. Influence on naval tactics. Experience in using obsolete ships for secondary tasks. Lessons in organizing surprise attacks under the guise of peaceful visits. Influence on naval education. Long service as a training ship, training several generations of German sailors. Chapter 8, Personalities and Fates. 8.1, Commanders of the ship. Captain Friedrich Boedeker, 1910 to 1913. Commanded during peacetime. Achieved a high level of combat training for the crew. Received the Kaiser's Prize for gunnery. Commanders at the Battle of Jutland. Demonstrated composure and professionalism. Successfully withdrew the damaged ship from battle. Captain Gustav Kleikamp, 1939. Commanded during the attack on Westerplatte. Organized a successful operation. Became part of history as the commander of the ship that started World War II. 8.2. The crew, from Imperial sailors to Nazi cadets. Crew composition at different times. 1908, 35 officers. 708 sailors. 1936, 31 officers, 565 sailors, 175 cadets. Wartime, up to 991 men. Fates of the sailors. Participants in the Battle of Jutland. Sailors of the interwar period. Cadets of the 1930s. Crew members from 1939 to 1945. 8.3. Historical figures associated with the ship. Kaiser Wilhelm II attended the ship's launching. Symbolized Germany's naval ambitions. Admiral Reinhard Scheer commanded the fleet at the Battle of Jutland, made the decision to use the pre-dreadnoughts. Adolf Hitler made the decision to attack Poland. The ship became a tool of his aggressive policy. Chapter 9. Schleswig-Holstein in Culture and Memory. 9.1. Reflection in Literature Memoirs of Participants. Recollections of sailors who served on the ship. Diaries of Battle of Jutland participants. Records of 1939 crew members. historical research, monographs on the history of the German Navy, studies of the Battle of Jutland, works on the beginning of World War II, fiction, mentions in novels about naval battles, the ship's image in works about World War II. 9.2. Cinema and documentaries, documentary films. Films about the Battle of Jutland. Documentaries about the beginning of World War II. Programs on naval history. Feature films. Episodic appearances in war films. Reconstructions of historical events. 9.3. Museum heritage. The ship's bell, displayed in Dresden, a symbol of memory for the ship and its history, photographs and documents, preserved in archives and museums, used in exhibitions and publications, ship models, in museums and private collections, as a subject for model making. 9.4. Commemorative events, anniversaries of historical events, the Battle of Jutland, the start of World War II, other significant events in the ship's history. Veterans gatherings, former crew members, historians and enthusiasts. Chapter 10. Comparative analysis with other historic ships. 10.1. Schleswig-Holstein and HMS Dreadnought parameter. Schleswig-Holstein HMS Dreadnought year. Commissioned 1908-1906. Displacement 14,218 tons, 18,120 tons. Main battery 4 times 280 millimeters, 10 times 305 millimeters. Speed 19.1 knots, 21 knots. Armor 240 to 280 millimeters, 279 millimeters. Propulsion triple expansion engines, steam turbines. Historical significance: last pre-dreadnought, first dreadnought. Conclusion: Dreadnought represented revolution. Schleswig-Holstein represented evolution. 10.2. Schleswig-Holstein and other long-lived ships, USS Texas, 1912 to 1948. American dreadnought battleship. Participated in both World Wars. Preserved as a museum ship. HMS Warspite, 1913 to 1947. British battleship. Participated in the Battle of Jutland and both World Wars. Legendary combat service. Comparison: Schleswig-Holstein is unique in that it began both World Wars, whereas other long-lived ships merely participated in them. 10.3. Place in naval history. Tactical significance. Typical representative of the last generation of pre-dreadnoughts. Example of effective use of obsolete ships. Strategic significance. Instrument of German naval policy. Symbol of the continuity of naval traditions. Historical significance. Witness to key events of the 20th century. Symbol of the connection between technology, politics, and history. Epilogue. A steel ghost of history. Schleswig-Holstein has lain on the bottom of the Gulf of Finland for over 70 years. Its rusting hulk is a silent witness to the turbulent 20th century. This ship was born in an era when naval power was measured by the number of smoking funnels and the thickness of armor plates. It served in a world where empires crumbled and totalitarian regimes emerged. It died in an era when aviation and missiles began to play the decisive role. The history of Schleswig-Holstein is a history of technologies that were both ahead of and behind their time. It is the history of the men who served on its decks, from imperial sailors to Nazi cadets. It is the history of political decisions that turned ships into instruments of aggression. But above all, the history of Schleswig-Holstein is a warning. A warning about how technical progress can render weapons obsolete even before their first shot is fired. A warning about how historical symbols can be used to justify new wars. A warning that the first shot of a war may be fired from the deck of a ship that arrived under the guise of a friend. The hulk of Schleswig-Holstein continues to lie on the Baltic seabed. Waves erase traces of paint. Seawater corrodes the steel. But the memory of the ship that began the most terrible war in human history remains. It remains in archives, in museums, in books, and in the minds of those who remember that history sometimes begins with a shot whose echo reverberates through the decades. The ship is dead. The war it started is over. But the lessons of history are alive. And as long as they are alive, there is hope that no other ship will start a new world war. Hope that steel giants will serve peace, not war. Hope that the memory of Schleswig-Holstein will be not only a reminder of the past, but also a warning for the future. Appendix. Chronology of main events. June 11, 1904. Order placed for construction. August 18, 1905. Kiel laid at Germania Werft Shipyard, Kiel. December 17, 1906. Launched. July 6, 1908. Commissioned. September 21, 1908. Assigned to 2nd Squadron. 1910 to 1913. Peacetime service, cruises, exercises. May 31 to June 1, 1916. Battle of Jutland. 1917. Placed in reserve, used as a floating barracks. 1919. Retained under Treaty of Versailles. 1924 to 1926. Modernization. February 1, 1926. Recommissioned as flagship. 1935. End of service as flagship. 1936. Converted to a training ship. August 25, 1939. Entered the Bay of Danzig. September 1, 1939. 4:45 a.m. Bombardment of Westerplatte. April 1940. Participation in the seizure of Denmark. 1940 to 1944. Training service. October to December, 1944. Modernization into an anti-aircraft ship. December 19, 1944. Sunk by British aircraft. March 21, 1945. Wreck demolished by its own crew. Spring 1946. Raised by Soviet salvors. June 25, 1947. Scuttled as a target in the Gulf of Finland. This narrative represents a historical study based on documentary sources and historical works. It is created for educational purposes and aims to preserve the memory of one of the most iconic ships of the 20th century.